Hi, my name is Stead Herndon. I'm a reporter with the New York Times, and I host the politics podcast, The Run Up. I was looking for Kevin Good.
So,
Thank you for picking up. I'm calling because we are talking to people who previously participated in Times polling to ask them about how they're feeling about this year, about the presidential election, and maybe answer a couple questions that we could use possibly on our podcast. Do you think you have maybe 5, 10 minutes for us to chat today?
all right, first, let me make sure this isn't a crazy machine.
It's not.
Shit.
This is a real reporter with the real New York Times who would love to get your thoughts about the presidential election.
All right, I got you, but you gotta say this for me. You ready?
You go first.
Okay, say pickles pointing specifically at people.
Pickles point specifically at people.
Okay, we got it.
I respect it because there's a lot of these AI machines are getting a little fancy these days. I get why you gotta make sure. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, what part of the country you're in, what you do? Just help me learn a little more about you.
Shoot, man. Well, I live in Delaware, and I survived.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How old are you?
38.
38. One question we're asking people is, do they consider themselves political, a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, anything like that?
I'll be honest with you. I'm waiting for a politic to come up and actually, like, make things really equal
Uh-huh.
instead of just, everybody just saying equality, actually make it equal.
You're saying someone who doesn't talk about equality, but you feel like you trust to actually do something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you voted previously? Do you vote?
Look at the options. Would you vote?
I totally understand that. Part of the reason we're calling people is to talk to people even who don't vote. So I guess I'm just asking that not to in any place of judgment, but just to get a better
I
sense
dig
about
it.
you. Excuse me?
No, I dig it 100%. I get it.
So I just wanted to ask again, can you tell me, have you ever voted in the presidential election? Have you ever felt inspired by a candidate and then went and do it, or have you not voted consistently?
Nah, I voted. I voted for Obama,
Okay.
but it wasn't because he was black. It was more so I had hoped that it was somebody that was going to be in here to actually like fix some shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of the reason you haven't participated is because you feel like they're not speaking to the things that actually matter for your day to day.
Exactly.
Would you be more willing to vote or participate in a political system that you thought candidates did actually speak to things that do affect your day to day life?
Hell yeah.
Okay. Okay. I just want to do this really quickly so that I have a clear answer. Why won't you vote for Joe Biden in November?
I think Joe Biden needs to just sit down.
You think Joe Biden needs to sit down?
Yeah, I think he needs to sit his old ass there. I won't vote for Joe Biden in November because he look like he sneezed away from the ICU.
And why won't you vote for Donald Trump in November?
Because I don't know how true it is, but they talking about Donald Trump is about to take away punishing the police.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so for you, the solution would just not be to vote at all.
For me, would be the option of voting for Snoop.
You putting Snoop, like Snoop Dogg?
Yes. But
I'm curious though, like why Snoop? You could write it anybody. Why Snoop?
why not Snoop?
Okay, I guess that's fair.
You get what I'm saying?
From the New York Times, I'm Stead Herndon. This is The Run Up. This election cycle, there's already been a lot of discussion of the non-voter, or people like Kevin. Because this year, huge numbers of Americans say they don't like their candidate options and the political system that produced them. So there are a lot of questions about whether this election will ultimately be decided by the people who choose not to show up. In 2016, there were about 100 million eligible voters who opted out of the process. In 2020, that number was closer to 80 million. But the reality is, for For all the talk about turnout numbers, very little attention is paid to who non-voters actually are, and if anything can be learned from the reasons they don't vote. So I called up Anthony Williams, who directed a major project on this subject for the Knight Foundation ahead of the 2020 election.
Every election cycle, campaigns from city council all the way up to president spend untold millions of dollars reaching out to and trying to understand the perspectives of those who vote on a regular basis. And so you end up getting the same opinions reinforced over and over and over again, and those opinions dominate the political conversation. So our question in this study was, what does everybody else think when you consider that everybody else is about 100 million eligible voters?
To help answer that question, they surveyed 12,000 non-voters across the country, people who they defined this way.
So we define non-voters as going back over 6 election cycles. So we took 3 presidential elections and 3 midterm elections. If somebody voted in one of those 6 elections, they were still eligible to participate in the survey because, depending on the issue, depending on the candidate, even a consistent non-voter might occasionally show up. If they voted in 2 or more elections, they were out. So that's how that's how we define non-voters, people who have voted in no more than one out of the last 6 major elections, and or those people who were eligible to vote but weren't even registered.
I feel like there's some assumptions that people make about who non-voters are, that they don't follow the news, maybe they lack an education, and general belief that maybe politics doesn't matter. These are just kind of things we often hear about this group. Take me through some of the myths that you think that your data might have shown some light to. How did those myths line up to reality of the 100 million eligible voters who don't participate that you all study?
Well, in terms of some of the rationale for why they don't participate, many of those sentiments were genuinely reflected in the research that we did. I guess the one big myth that we were able to dispel is there was a notion that this group was somehow monolithic, all low income, all supporting one particular party or the other, and that just wasn't the case. This is not a monolithic group by any stretch of the imagination, and in fact, when you look at it from a partisan lens, it's roughly a third, and a third between Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
So when you all's research, the non-voting population didn't break down as if, there was a sleeping mass of Democrats or a bunch of Republicans who were untapped. But you're saying largely it broke down into Democrats, Republicans, independents, fairly equally split.
Fairly equally split. Now, when you divide the group further, we also had the opportunity, once we finished our primary analysis, we took it a step further and we found 6 subgroups within the non-voting population.
Well, take me through some of those 6 subgroups. What were the specific groups that you found under the umbrella of America's non-voters?
So we divided the group first into what we considered plugged in and disconnected. And by plugged in, we meant paying attention to news, generally aware of issues that are taking place, because there's also this perception that non-voters just don't know. Well, that's true for some non-voters, but many non-voters engage in some of the same behaviors in terms of information consumption as people who do participate. So on the plugged-in end of the perspective, you have one subgroup that's established progressives, tend to lean a little bit more toward Democratic candidates and policies. A traditional conservative cohort, which tends to be older, male, and more Republican-leaning, and then a modern moderate, which is sort of in between.
How would we define a modern moderate? That's the one I think I have the most questions on.
The key attitudes with that group is really when it comes down to political viewpoints on issues, right? So among that moderate group is a belief that the issues, they may go back and forth. They may agree with Democrats on a particular issue. They may agree with Republicans on a particular issue. And that subgroup may actually be more open to considering third-party candidates over either of the 2 major parties. They also tend to be younger than the average non-voter and are the most ethnically diverse among the plugged-in non-voting population.
Okay, so what about the disconnected groups that you all found? How would we break them down more clearly?
So you have sort of an indifferent average, an unattached apolitical, and an underemployed and unsure.
Okay, I'm going to need definitions on all of those.
Absolutely. So the indifferent average was specifically people who had a mix of political views, and they are united by members of that group lacking interest in news or following political current events, right? So this is kind of step one on the unplugged side, the disengaged side.
Okay, so they might be they might have a general, maybe some understanding of issues or things happening, but they're definitely not actively following it.
Exactly right.
Got it. What about the unattached apolitical? You also set that group.
Right. That is actually where a lot of the younger people on average are, and generally have lower educational attainment and lower household income on average. A majority of this group is unmarried, and they are also most likely to have moved within the last few years. And so what you're looking at there is just kind of an instability. Perhaps these people later on in life, once they become rooted, might participate, but at this stage in their lives, there's too much instability in their own day-to-day for them to even care to research the.
I hear how this could affect something like voting, even if we think about registration, knowing where to go, knowing the type of issues, knowing the candidates who are on the ballot. If you're someone who has a more kind of unstable life, if you're moving more often, if you've just got bigger stuff going on in your day-to-day survival, I can see how politics seems a little far afield.
Absolutely. Now, ironically, it's those people for whom politics is probably the most important because policy decisions impact those who are most vulnerable most directly. So the fact that they don't have the time or the interest to engage is likely in many ways to their detriment. What we find, and I guess this is not unique to the United States nor unique to our current situation in politics, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Those people who are engaged in the voting process typically are those who are more likely to get policy that they agree with passed. And so those people who are disengaged, largely on the notion that government doesn't really work for them, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, politicians are like people who work in any other industry. They respond to the customers that they see in front of them and the complaints or suggestions that they hear most frequently.
What about the last group you mentioned about the more disconnected group of non-voters, the underemployed unsures, I think you called them? And how is that different than maybe people who are apolitical or people who are, the indifferent group you talked about more previously?
Well, for this group, there is the additional challenge of there being something of a financial impediment. This group is characterized by having, of all the groups, the lowest educational attainment, the lowest home ownership rate, lowest marriage rate, least full-time employment, and lowest household income. This group is also overwhelmingly female, and those females are typically single head of households raising children. And so you can see where the demands of life get in the way of participation in politics.
Yeah, I mean, you got mouths to feed. Who cares about this little election?
Exactly. And neither of these candidates is going to help me feed these mouths, so I don't care.
I think when we talk about non-voters, we sometimes assume like a disconnected person of color. You mentioned traditional conservatives were a group that trended older, white, male. Is that an outlier? How much can we have a racial breakdown of non-voting population?
Well, in the same way that you can't really apply the socioeconomic or education lens to the entire group, you can't really apply the racial lens either. Overall, they're very much a reflection of the body politic of the country. But again, as you look at particular subgroups, you're going to see more or less of a particular group. So among that traditional conservative group, that's overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly older. The typical person who, when we ask them about their media consumption, would say that they are following certain websites, they're watching Fox News, et cetera, very much like any other conservative would.
They're just not voting.
They're just not voting.
Yeah. The report lays out several main takeaways from the data. Can you take me through the takeaways? And then I have a question from that thing.
Sure thing. So in terms of general takeaways, what we found is that non-voters, first of all, are not, for the most part, embarrassed, because that was one of the things that we were concerned about going into this research. Would you get answers that were kind of respondents saying what they thought you wanted to hear, or would they be honest? And what we found is that most people were not embarrassed or ashamed at all to tell you that they don't vote, and were happy to tell you all the reasons why not.
Interesting. Did that surprise you?
It did. We thought that there might be some, the American ethos of participatory democracy is so ingrained in popular culture, but that we thought there might be some shame in people not participating. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. People were as candid as you could possibly believe, and would basically tell you either I don't like politics, I'm not interested in politics, or I don't trust politics.
I don't like politics, I'm not interested in politics, or I don't trust politics.
And in many cases, all the above.
What were some more? Because there's one I'm particularly interested in. Maybe I'll read it to you. The emerging electorate is even less informed and less interested in politics. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we did as part of the survey is we wanted to have a specific comparison frame among young people.
Okay.
And so we did what's called an oversample. Over and above the 12,000 interviews that we did with everybody, we did 1,000 interviews just among people between 18 and 24 and asked them the same series of questions. And what we found is that there's a pretty significant drop-off in news viewership, civic engagement, interest in politics, all of the things that might lead somebody to voting or not voting. There was a significant drop-off, obviously, between voters and non-voters. And then that drop-off is even more dramatic between the general voter and young people.
Okay. Should I take that as like having been true generally about young people, less interested in news, whatever? Or is this a particular thing or moment, or is there something happening among kind of news consumption in young people, do you think?
Young people have always been generally less engaged in the political process, but this is deeper than just disengagement. The distrust among younger voters and the belief that politics and government just fundamentally doesn't react to them is so ingrained that it's difficult to even engage in a conversation about why voting is important, because for many of these folks in the younger cohort who don't vote, they don't see any evidence of a connection between the political process and their day-to-day lives. For other groups, as they get older and take on responsibilities and you have kids and you buy a house and you do those things, those behaviors then tend to push you towards participation in the political system. This is a group of people that I'm not 100% sure it's going to be as easy. Even as they mature, the distrust, disinterest in the system is so profound. They're bored by it or they're frustrated by it. There's just a lot of people who don't want to be involved with it, don't want to hear anything about it.
Is any of this candidate specific? Donald Trump is someone who has kind of prided himself on bringing new people into the into the kind of voting population, activating people who weren't interested in politics before. I've talked to people who have voted for Biden and Democrats for the first time, partially because of their fear of the other side in unique ways. How much does the candidate matter? And do we have any evidence that any candidate motivates non-voters more than any other?
Candidates definitely matter, but they matter at the margins. For example, 2008, the first Obama campaign, you saw an uptick in overall participation, and particularly an uptick among some of these younger groups of people that traditionally don't participate in voting. There was a significant uptick in the 2020 election on both sides. To your point, Donald Trump was certainly motivational, probably as motivational for more Biden voters to show up than they were Trump voters, even though Republican vote also went up pretty significantly between 16 and 20. Beyond that, if we're waiting for the perfect candidate to have an impact on voter turnout, that's going to happen once in a while. Either you're going to have a particularly good candidate that turns people on, or you're going to have a particularly scary candidate that turns people off. And this could be Democrat, Republican, Independent. across the political spectrum. Those shifts are temporary and illusory, if I can use that term.
So you're saying those shifts are temporary, but what you're talking about is like a larger and more sustainable tide raise of voting that only comes with kind of addressing these more structural and long-standing beliefs.
Exactly. A particular good or a bad candidate will move things a percentage or a few percentages at the margins. But what we're trying to focus on in this particular study, and we hope that elected officials and activists in the political space will take seriously, are these fundamental chips in the strength of American democracy. It's hard to convince people to vote if they don't believe fundamentally that their vote is going to matter or change anything. And the trend lines are concerning.
Can we apply some of this to this year? I know this research was done after 2016 and going into 2020. The unique thing, of course, about 24 is that we very likely are going to have the same two candidates on the top of the ticket again. When you think about this research and the themes that you all were seeing at that time, I mean, anecdotally, I feel like a lot of the people we talk to now seem to greater and greater reflect some of the sentiments that you were sharing before. What's your sense about what applies to now that you learned then?
The sense that I get is that these were significant, but somewhat below the radar sentiments. And what we're seeing now as kind of a general disillusionment post-COVID, all of the challenges that we've had with the functioning of our federal government, believe it or not, many voters are starting to now mimic the same types of disillusionment. But they're also mimicking the same fear of the other that we saw in the 2020 election. So Republicans are just as sure that Biden and the Democrats are the end of democracy as Democrats are sure that Trump and the Republicans are the end of democracy. So that's either going to lead more people to check out or it's going to drive more people to vote just out of fear, not really out of support for either of these people.
Two feelings can exist alongside one another. The feelings of apathy and disillusionment that I think you all were tracking here that seems to have grown among a general voting population could lead some to not participate. But at the same time, you're saying the fear and the kind of the fear of the other side that was so deeply rooted in 2020 is still here. And that's also going to have its effect. These two things are kind of in conflict with one another. Your belief that the system's not working as opposed to your kind of hatred for the other person at war with one another.
Right. And what we see here is that particularly among these folks who are not particularly political to begin with and don't really lean towards either party, as the nature of the debates become more and more fiercely partisan, more and more of those people are likely to check out.
Got it. There's a huge incentive here for both parties to turn these possible non-voters into voters, obviously, and that gives them a big advantage. But what we see is that among the non-voting populations that you have helped us understand, it's more likely that the engaged kind of people who are withholding their vote but follow politics move into the voter bucket. Then the folks who are more disengaged, don't follow news, have other stuff in their lives going on, in which this political environment you're suspecting puts them even further away.
Right. And for those people who are interested in growing the pie of civic participation, this is not the ideal atmosphere for that.
You know, non-voting is often treated as this like very illogical act. Like, who could do this? Why would they not see that this matters? I'm curious, after all your research, like, how do you see it? Do you understand why these people don't do it? Or do you kind of still have that sense of like, it does affect you? So while I understand the barriers, they could be overcome.
I'll answer the question this way. From my own personal perspective, I guess you could say that I have been engaged in some form of government ever since student council in kindergarten. And so personally, I would never not vote. But what this research taught me definitively is that this is not an irrational group of people, right? They have made a rational determination that them taking the time to participate in this system is, for whatever reason, not worth it to them.
If we were to look ahead to November, do you have any clues for us? Or if we were to look at the 6 groups that you laid out of non-voters, if there was a group that you think might have the biggest effect on the question of who might win, or maybe the most movable group for the parties to target, who would that be?
The subgroup that I would look at most this cycle, the modern moderates,
Yeah.
who are engaged and knowledgeable but don't feel a particular affinity to either side. I think it's going to be a group of people to whom both political parties should pay attention. It could be determinative. The number of true independents is relatively small. And so there's not a whole lot of places for the two political parties or the presidential campaigns to go for new support. And I suspect that the closer this race is, especially in the tightly contested swing states, they're going to reach further and further into this group of people who don't traditionally participate.
This is really helpful because the number of persuadable partisans is smaller and smaller and smaller. It does seem to give a greater importance to the type of people who exist outside of that space and are the non-voting populations that often go ignored.
Exactly. It would be my recommendation, my sentiment based on the research that we've done, that either party that does not participate in outreaching to these groups in this particular landscape is probably making a mistake because there isn't anybody else.
Well, thank you. This was really helpful. I appreciate your time, and thanks for helping us out.
My pleasure. Take care.
So, according to Anthony, the most movable group of non-voters are people who are engaged in politics, but for whatever reason, are inconsistent when it comes to showing up to vote. After the break, we hear from some of this group who could potentially be the deciders come November. So Anthony was focused on non-voters broadly, and particularly chronic non-voters, or people who rarely participate in presidential elections at all. But when it comes to who's going to win in November, the most important group of non-voters are likely the ones who are more persuadable and are open to voting, depending on the circumstances, the candidates, and their message. With that in mind, we asked the New York Times polling team for a list of people who had not voted in 2020, but were still deciding about 2024. And we called some of them up to see what, if anything, was shaping their decision.
Hello.
Hello, my name is Sten Herndon. I was calling looking for James Simonson.
You got him.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you for picking up. We really appreciate your time. Can you just tell me a little bit about yourself? What part of the country are you in? How old are you? What do you do? Things like that.
I'm 59 years old. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I work in high precision tooling, so kind of a tech industry thing.
I am curious, are you someone who identifies as a Democrat, Republican, Independent, anything like that?
I really don't identify anymore. I used to be a Republican, but the Republican Party seems to be going away from my values, or I'm going away from theirs. So the Democrats are too far to the left, so I'm probably an independent now.
Okay, so are we talking about kind of Donald Trump's Republican Party?
Yeah, I voted for Donald Trump the first time around. I thought it would be good to shake up things in Washington, and he did do that, but there's no way I can vote for that guy again. It's he's crazy.
Are you someone who usually votes in presidential elections? Were you abstaining from voting in 2020?
Yeah, I was abstaining. I usually vote, but I was abstaining.
Did you vote down ballot? Was it just an abstaining from the presidential race?
No, I just abstained from voting. I didn't bother.
Got it.
In Indiana, if you, at least in for state elections and for you're gonna, it's gonna be a Republican in this state. It's just pointless to think that a Democrat can win it. It's just a waste of time. And I'm actually thinking pretty hard. If depending on who the Democrats put up, which is probably going to be Biden, I might be forced to vote for him just because he's a known entity and he's more predictable than Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to ask about. You abstained in 2020. We're very likely to have those same two candidates again, but you might vote this time.
I might vote because of recognizing how crazy and dangerous Donald Trump really is. I'm no fan of Biden, but Biden I don't really think is doing a lot of the decision making anyway. There's people behind him that are doing the policy and making decisions and running the country. I think he's more of a figurehead. His age does trouble me, and he seems to be frail, and his mental acuity is an issue. So, but that's okay. There's other people around him that are helping him make decisions.
This was so helpful. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate this conversation.
You're welcome. You have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day. Hello, my name is Stead Herndon. I'm a reporter with the New York Times. I was looking for Kristen Love.
This is.
Hi, thank you for picking up. What part of the country are you in? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I am in Colorado.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm in the San Luis Valley, which is a pretty rural area.
How old are you?
39.
Mm-hmm. Are you someone who considers yourself a Democrat or Republican or independent or anything like that?
I'm non-political.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
I honestly think that our politics are kind of crap, to put it bluntly. And if it's not like directly relevant in like a local politics, I try not to get too involved. Mm-hmm. It's a very capitalist, patriarchal society, and
Mm-hmm. I want to talk more about that, actually. I mean, have you voted in presidential elections?
I have before, yes.
Mm-hmm. What about the last one? Did you vote in 2020?
No.
Okay. So did you kind of drop off of voting in presidential elections, or is it just depends on which one means whether you participate or not?
If there was a woman that ran, I'd probably vote for a woman. Mm-hmm. But as it is now, it really doesn't make much of a difference how you vote. I think the same things are going to happen regardless of who the president is.
Mm-hmm. Did you vote back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton was the Democratic nominee?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. So you're saying if there was a candidate that's particularly spoke to you, you felt inspired by, or, shared an identity with, that would make you more likely to vote?
It would. But I mean, it would also depend on what some of the issues are and everything. But as it is, I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, do you consider your withholding of a vote or your decision not to vote as a protest or a message to that system that you don't really like? Or is it just because you don't want to do it and it's just more of a matter of convenience or something like that?
I think it kind of stems from my cynicism as, learning more about the way things are actually run and who's behind stuff and whether our vote really matters. It's a kind of the cynical attitude that I've developed that I'm not going to waste my time doing it because it doesn't really matter.
Do you plan to vote this year?
No, not really.
I'm giving you some time to think about it. What goes into that decision? Why not? I know it's because of the things you just said, but specific to this year, you already feel pretty confident you won't end up voting?
I don't know. I guess maybe if Trump actually ends up on the ballot, I'd go just to vote against him.
Interesting.
But
interesting.
As for whether I think it really matters, I don't think it really matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Is there anything Joe Biden could do or Democrats could do to turn you from someone who probably won't vote to someone who will vote this year?
Yeah, put a minority woman in.
Isn't the vice president a minority woman?
Yeah. The more they can take away middle-aged white men out of our faces of power, then I probably would consider voting.
But I'm sorry, her current status as number 2 or the running mate to Joe Biden is not enough for you. I just want to be clear.
No, it's not enough.
Okay. Well, it's going to be interesting. I'll be curious to see what you end up doing in November, considering that for a lot of the Biden hopes, they hope that, maybe if you're not excited about him or the Democrats on the ticket, that you would come out to vote against Trump. And you're saying that that could be a possibility for you.
That could be a possibility.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
There was one more person I wanted to talk to. Someone who wrote into the show last year, who said for the first time in her life, she was considering not voting at all.
So, well, I live in New York. I've been living in New York for a while now. It's going on 20 years. I guess I consider myself Afro-Puerto Rican. I'm Puerto Rican by ethnicity. And then I'm on the more African presenting side of that.
And how old are you? What do you do now?
So I'm 41. And I just transitioned careers actually. For a while I was in the arts and entertainment industry, and then I moved into arts education, and just recently I transitioned into case management at a community college.
Arlene was upset about the administration's policy in Gaza, and we spoke to her in late December.
What would you say is like your do you consider yourself have you considered yourself a Democrat or Republican or something in between?
Yeah, I mean, I guess loosely a Democrat, and that's only because those are that's kind of the box that I need to check on the form. But I've always been registered as a Democrat. And I consider myself more sort of progressive leaning than I guess you could say the stereotypical Democrat might be.
Are you someone who has historically voted in presidential elections?
Always.
And for you, like, what's been the biggest factor that's gone into that vote?
I just have always believed really strongly in a citizen's duty to vote. I mean, like the civil rights images have always been like really seared into my mind.
You said that you're considering sitting out the election. Yeah, my last kind of question here is like, we talked to the Biden campaign a couple months ago, and their sense was that come November 2024, that the reality of Donald Trump or another Republican winning, or the way that voters have traditionally placed foreign policy concerns under other concerns, like the economy or things happening domestically, would make it such that people like you, even with how they might feel about Joe Biden right now, might be ready to come back around come November. I guess I'm wondering what you think about that premise.
Look, I'm a rational person, and I recognize how that may be true. That could be the case. I also feel like it's a miscalculation. I think it's lazy, and it feels insulting because it means that they're not listening. You're supposed to be representing me, and you're not listening. Then where does that leave me? Does that mean I should keep supporting you? You're not listening? That's what I feel about it.
So, with our focus on non-voters this week, I decided to call Arlene back. Is this Arlene?
It is.
I know we talked before, but I'm glad to be able to reconnect because partially we're doing something specifically focused on people who kind of have an open question about whether to vote or not. And that got us thinking about the conversation we previously had. So can you just talk to me about how you are thinking about voting this year and how that's changed from kind of where you were previously?
Yeah. This year, for the first time, towards in the fall of last year, 2023, for the first time, I questioned whether or not I felt comfortable participating in the process, which was a real sort of, definitely a shift, but it also kind of shook something in me, I think, even just to consider that, because I've been so deeply committed to it and just really believed in the act of voting in a democracy.
I'm wondering how you feel now in relationship to how you felt last fall.
There's a shift. It's interesting because the last time that we spoke, one of the things that I remember you saying was that the administration's bet that they're making is that eventually people will sort of remember the existential threat that another potential Trump presidency could pose. And that once they realize that, then they'll, go ahead and vote for the president again, for Biden again. and Democrats across the board. Quite frankly, as the election has come closer, the steps that the administration is taking, the resolution in the UN, but more importantly, Trump cinching the Republican nomination, which I, still had hopes for in December that he wouldn't. So, there is this looming danger. And I do believe that a Trump presidency would be more dangerous, a lot more, oh my God, so much more than a Biden presidency. Mm-hmm. I've never been a single issue voter before. I never have. It just what happened in the fall, it felt like such a moral dilemma, and now, the compromise, the feeling of being willing to compromise is coming back. But it does not, it feels worse than it's ever felt before.
I want to just be clear. You think if the election was today, you probably would vote for Biden?
I would, I'm closer to voting for Biden than I was when we spoke in December.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's because of this shift in position, but also the reality of the prospect of Donald Trump's return has become more tangible. And you do feel that looming over your decision more.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like, damn, the bet that the administration made is gonna, I hate to be a part of that statistic.
You hate that they pegged you right.
Yeah, I really, really do. Yeah, I do, but the threat from the other side it's a lot bigger.
I appreciate you checking back in with us. And if something changes over these next several months, specifically to this question about you voting, feel free to let us know, because I would be interested to see if, you're right, that this is kind of a kind of set feeling that you're going to stick at with now, or maybe something comes back up specific to Gaza or another issue that returns you back to the same place. So keep us in touch.
Will do.
I hate to say it, but after spending this week thinking about non-voters, I kind of understand why the parties don't focus on them. Many aren't plugged into politics, avoid the news intentionally, and have deep-seated problems with the political system that won't be solved overnight. But at the same time, there's a lot to be learned from this group, and especially the people who are wavering in real time. Because what I heard from voters like James and Arlene is a sentiment I often hear from the Biden campaign itself, that the closer we get to November, the more tangible the threat of Trump will become. So no matter Biden's political weaknesses, which may dominate the race right now, nothing unites people more than a shared enemy. That's the run-up for Thursday, March 28th, 2024. And now, the rundown.
Now, I have a governing partner who will fight for you and for your family until the last corporate kickback from our government, the last toxin is cleared from our water and our soil.
On Tuesday, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced his running mate in his independent bid for president.
So I'm proud to introduce to all of you the next Vice President of the United States of America, Nicole Shanahan. Thank you.
Nicole Shanahan is a 38-year-old investor and philanthropist who's never held political office.
Hi, everybody. And thank you so much for being here today.
She was a major funder of the RFK Jr. Super Bowl ad that ran earlier this year.
So here is how the Kennedy-Shanahan ticket is going to end the chronic disease epidemic.
In her speech, Shanahan aligned herself with Kennedy, using conspiratorial messages about public health and the political system as a whole.
While Bobby is focused on ending the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, I am going to assemble the best technologists and scientists in the world, and we will...
By naming a VP, Kennedy also continues his fight for ballot access nationwide, as many states require both the candidates' names to qualify for the ballot. So far, Kennedy only has ballot access in Utah. And last week, former RNC chair Ronna McDaniel was hired as a contributor at NBC News. But after several network anchors spoke out against it, she was dropped on Tuesday. Finally,
April 15th. That is the date that the world will see a former president of the United States stand trial in a criminal case for the first time in history.
A judge denied Donald Trump's efforts to delay his criminal trial in Manhattan regarding the alleged cover-up of hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels.
The Washington Post reports that Trump, seated at the defense table, grimaced and shook his head as the judge ruled against him.
Jury selection is set to begin April 15th. That's just 18 days away. There are now 109 days to the Republican National Convention, 144 days till the Democratic National Convention, and 222 days till the general election. We'll see you next week. The Run-Up is reported by me, Ested Herndon, and produced by Elisa Gutierrez, Caitlin O'Keefe, and Anna Foley. It's edited by Rachel Dry and Lisa Tobin, with original music by Dan Powell, Marian Lozano, Pat McCusker, Diane Wong, Sophia Landman, and Alicia Itu. It was mixed by Sophia Landman and fact-checked by Caitlin Love. Special thanks to Paula Schumann, Sam Dolnick, Larissa Anderson, David Haufinger, Maddie Masiello, Mahima Chablani, Jeffrey Miranda, and Elizabeth Bristow. Do you have questions about the 2024 election? Email us at therunup@nytimes.com. Or better yet, record your question using the voice memo app in your phone. That email again is therunup@nytimes.com. Thanks for listening, y'all.